sitting here like I'm sitting here really okay. Thanks for tuning in. I know that last week I had a little bit of a hiccup with my scheduling, but this week we're back on a schedule. I am working on a 2-point medieval house, and I do apologize. I've got my 3D printer running in the background, so there's a little bit of ambient noise, but hopefully it's not too loud, and we can just move on past that. So, I started with a quick sketch yesterday. Let me see if I've got it up here still. That's a little bitty one. It's kind of light. Let's bump that up. So I started with this sketch, and I realized that the perspective was a little bit off. So I completely deconstructed this, and then I rebuilt it using the proper perspective scales. So we've got the main structure, and now I'm going to go through and we're going to reline it and add some detail elements to it and make it fancy. So let's get started. Let's see, where are we at? There's the roof. There's the red lines. Let's make those red. Now I'm going to be using a lot of the ruler tool here because this is a building. It's got a lot of straight lines. And if your lines aren't straight, they will definitely show. Now I'll probably go through once I get this a little bit more fleshed out, and I will actually add in unstraightened lines just because I want to add a little bit of character to the building. But I'm definitely doing that second. I'm not going to start with that. I'm going to make sure my lines are solid and can build the building correctly. Actually, you know what? I already did this with the red line. No reason to like keep going over this. So let's go ahead and just start building my building. I've got my underdrawing already in there, so I can just kind of pull lines and move them where I need to. I've been having some trouble pulling straight lines this week. And it looks like I may have lost one of my followers. He was watching me every day, and then last week I had a lot of issues. Computer crashed a couple of times. Having some family issues. Needed to take a little bit of personal time, and that doesn't always go over so well with streaming. Now, one thing I noticed when I was looking at all my reference photos of these medieval buildings, they are not even close. Pun not necessarily intended. Yeah, they were kind of all over the place with their constructions. But I did notice some cool little patterns and alterations in the little wood paneling and the wainscoting. I'm trying to position this arm correctly so I can pull this line. So your body mechanics really only likes to pull straight lines in one specific motion. It's very much your shoulder drawing the line with your elbow and your wrist kind of isolated. That's not easy to do. It's not an easy thing to realize that you can only draw straight lines one way. Now I know that there's a lot of people out there that claim that they can do it using anywhere or any position of their arm. Sure, there's always going to be exceptions to this rule. But for the most part, other than a ton of practice, your body really only wants to pull a line one way, one place. And right now I am not listening to my body because I'm trying to pull it with my elbow all bent. Yeah, let's put this a little higher. I'm glad nobody's watching because this is really bad. I typically do not have this much of an issue. I'm trying to just pull a straight line. This is wrecking my life right now. Should not have been that hard. This is one of the issues I was having last week as well. I was just struggling just to pull straight lines, and it kind of throws you off mentally when you spend a lot of time trying to do a repetitive task and you're able to see that it's wrong, but you can't really figure out how to adjust to make it not wrong. Add a little bit of extra weight on the bottom of that because this line here is the horizon, so everything above that we now see the bottom edge of it, everything below it we see the top edge of it. So just adding a little bit of extra weight to those edges really kind of sells that false illusion. And yes, I know I didn't have to say illusion kind of like a douche, but too late. I want to have these boards extend a little bit beyond this line, because then they will look like they're in front of them, which is exactly the idea. It's amazing how your brain will pick up on those little subtleties. And this wall was going to be stone. So I'm going to try to keep some organic shapes, some irregular shapes. I don't want to get too set into the same pattern. But at the same time, I don't want to get so crazy detailed that I end up having to draw a ton of little tiny features. I'm thinking right now I'm going to come back over the top and do all my window dressings and stuff like that. I'm going to do the boards that would support the buildings and the roofs. So I'm kind of drawing this building in parts, and then I'll piece them all together and stitch it nice and tight. I'm trying to think right now of how I would lay these stones if I were a mason. Putting stone on top of stone, fitting them in here. But at the same time, they're not going to be perfectly cut. They're gonna have to wedge in here in some places. So another thing that this does is it creates a little pocket of higher density texture, where I've got big open squares here of no texture or light texture, and then this is going to be a drastically different texture. So it's concentrated area of detail. Adds a lot of interest to the piece. And I'm just kind of trying to talk about the things I'm thinking about as I'm doing this. I'm not liking that one so much. You'll be able to start seeing rocks, and you're like, that doesn't look like a rock shape. Now I know that I have to have a little thickness for that roof there, so those rocks are going to stop right there, and they will continue right up here. Okay, I dig that. Now I'm thinking a wood deck right here, but these rocks are going to continue all the way down to this sub-basement area. The only difference is I was planning on putting a different texture of rock. I saw in my reference photos there's a medieval building where they had built up a stone wall beneath a hill, where kind of a hill came down, and they built this stone wall to bring that first floor level, but they separated it with these different blocks between the first floor and the sub basement. So I kind of want to do that here. I'm going to erase a big chunk of this here, just so I can have a consistent theme. And in that reference, the blocks were these vertical stones. I'll actually come back through and erase a little bit here to clean this up where it would end up being behind this wooden deck. But for right now, I'm just kind of throwing them in. And then I fill that stone back in. I'm liking that, so I'm going to start throwing on a little bit of stone texture before I get too far in here. Stone texture is a little bit hard to describe. The the surface is rough, but it can be polished smooth. I find that rough texture is just kind of abstract, so just kind of play with it. Just don't do too much, and don't do too many repeating patterns. So if you find yourself doing the same motions, stop and actively try to do something different. I wonder if I can turn OBS audio off for me. Sorry, I get this weird feedback loop. Makes it hard for me to speak because I end up hearing myself. No, it looks like it cut all the desktop audio. It was not what I wanted. I just didn't want to hear myself speak. Yeah, I guess not. It's a really unfortunate thing. Okay, gonna continue the stonework below this walkway. Let's get a little texture in these too. And a little bit of lines will go a long way in this. Different line weights also help. You see, just throwing a little bit of a thicker line on the bottom immediately gives this three-dimensional texture to this wall. So if you ever hear somebody talk about line weight, you know, they want to see more line weight in your art or something like that, this is what they're talking about. Put a thicker line on one edge of stuff. If you did a thicker line all the way around, it would still just flatten out. But uneven thick lines, so thick, thin, medium, thick, you'll get this layering effect, and your brain will automatically try to figure out what layer is in front of what, and so you get these different undulating textures and objects getting placed in front of each other. Alright, more stone wall. Now I'm thinking these are the bigger blocks on the bottom of the building. They got to be more stable, more structured and strong, so there's not going to be as many little tiny blocks here. So I can get away with putting big swaths of area. Put a diamond shaped guy there. trying to think to make some rocks more round, some rocks more pointed. And if I have like a little step here, where it's you don't want your lines to match up perfectly. Those are called tangents. I've talked about those before. You want there to be little steps and gaps. But when you run into one of those, try to remember that whatever's gonna get stuck in there is gonna not be able to line up perfectly with whatever's below it. I'm not gonna. I'll use this as an example. I'm not gonna have a rock that's gonna curve around that and end up starting down here. That just doesn't make much sense. So coming off this step, I've got to keep it on that line, or I've got to go ahead and put something in there to kind of fill that gap. In fact, that's what I'm going to do right there. No, that's too close to that rock there. Now, one of the things you'll run into when you start it one way and go the other, you'll start trying to break your patterns, and so you end up forcing yourself into a pattern without knowing it. So one of the things you may have seen me do up at the top here is start building your wall from another point. So I've been building this direction so far. I'm going to jump over here and start placing rocks till I meet up. That'll give me a more organic feel when I get to the middle. So put a big rock there. Yeah, it'll keep me from copying my patterns over and over again, because you never want to do that. Hey, thanks for tuning in. Right now we're building a medieval 5-story house, but it's a 2-point perspective. Put a big round guy right there. I don't like that so much. Let's try to just dividing that there. If you have any questions or anything like that, just hit me up in the comments. So that was building a little bit too much of a tangent. It was basically putting a straight line right across the stones there. It looks really unnatural for that straight of a line in organic items like this. And I know the corner of my building's right here. So I gotta think that there's gonna be a wrap to that structure where the rocks kind of come around the edge of the building. Now, if you see the red lines I got on my screen, you may be asking, why am I drawing where I've got another line clearly is going to end up later? And the reason is I want to have consistent lines, because if I don't think this through all the way, you'll have a huge disconnect. It's easier to just draw them in now and then erase them when I put the other line in. And I'll put the other line in on another layer, and then I'll switch over to this one and erase behind it. But if I'm not thinking about that from the beginning, then I'll end up forgetting about it and just trying to fudge a line in there, and it'll end up looking really weird. I've done it a couple of times, and it's really bizarre. It kind of stands out. You can see it really easy. There I go again, copying the same pattern. So switch over to a different area, start drawing rocks from there. That's too close to a tangent for my liking. That's fine. That's good there. Oh, there goes my viewer. I can only try to engage so much. Screen. Alright, before I move on to this other side of the wall, I am gonna put some texture in these. Now when I'm putting in these textures, I'm trying to think about a few areas that would catch the light differently. Sorry, my 3D printer was making a little extra noise. So, still doing that line weight, adding heavier lines in certain areas, doing that as I kind of go this time. These deep pockets, trying to throw some more dark line in there. crazy how just a slightly thicker line is so easily eye-tricking. Our eyes are big dum-dums. Keep those shapes abstract for anything organic. True abstract art is a lot harder than a lot of people will make you think, because you naturally want to do a pattern. There's paintings where people basically just spill paint on a canvas. They're super easy to do. A lot of people start abstract art that way because it's a real entryway that's not a big hurdle. You basically just fill a cup with paint, pour it on a canvas, spin it around. And the reason it's so easy is because you're not having to do the abstraction. Just gravity, nature is abstracting. And you can just see, I just did a copy. I ended up copying my same brush stroke, one over, slightly turned. It looks too similar. So now I've had to go back and take that out. But actual abstract shapes and art are extremely hard for a human brain to come up with. So actual abstract artists that take the time to make really good abstract art, they're very rare. And a lot of times artists like Pollock, they're master artisans. They were trained traditionally to be master artists, and then they took that and went, you know what? I want to do something a little bit avant-garde. I'm gonna make this painting that doesn't look like anything else, and it doesn't look like anything that you can recognize. And by doing so, you'll start thinking about other parts of society and humanity, because I'm forcing you to think. That's really challenging, to do it the way that he did it. Pouring paint on a cup and then dumping the cup on a canvas, it's not the same, not even close. And I'm not that big a fan of abstract art, but I gotta tip my hat to people like John Pollock, because that's a talent that I do not have. Pure abstraction. God, this feedback on this mic is killing me. I'm gonna have to spend this next week trying to figure out how to cut that out. It's just enough of a time delay to throw my brain off. I'm gonna come back through and I'm gonna throw some kind of ground plane on here, but I haven't figured out what I'm gonna do on that. Now I want you to sense this change in direction. So I've got to be a little bit more subtle with my textures. I don't know if I'm going to change them to be more or on a different edge. Ugh, that was bad. That as well. Yeah, I'm not liking that texture so much right there. We'll come back to that rock. Sorry if this is the boring part of the video. Just, I gotta focus on doing the drawing, and I don't have any viewers, so I'm just gonna work. And if anybody shows up, I'll try to pay attention. But as of right now, my one viewer took off, so I'm just gonna work. And if I think of something to talk about, I most certainly will, but right now it's easier to just get sucked into the work. I'm digging that texture right there on that rock. So you have some that, and then I just copied it. I just try to rip it off. Did it again. Pretty solid texture there. Do a quick save. It's one thing I have to complain about this program. It doesn't have an autosave feature. And that terrifies me. Because I put in a lot of work and then lost the work when I try to save it. Now, right here is where I'm going to do those separate style blocks, so I'm thinking I may actually want to set them in first. And I'm drawing the bottoms of these because this is going to be a sloping ground plane. It kind of comes down below the first floor of the building. So I'm going to be able to see the bottoms of these on some. They're going to end up getting covered up here, but I need to pre-draw that bottom so that when I get to the point where I'm drawing that ground plane in, I know where I can erase. And I got this idea from looking directly at reference, so definitely look at reference before you start drawing this stuff. I've been looking at reference for about a week and a half now, which is why I don't have it up on my screen right now, but it's definitely a good thing. And if you have trouble pulling up visual objects, put the reference right on the screen with you. There's a lot of space here I'm not using. I could throw in a new layer and put that reference right in front of my face. And that would help out a lot if I had trouble with my visual library. Now, I personally don't have that issue, so I'll spend a while looking at the reference, and then I will put it away. And then if I get into a problem where I'm like, what was that reference that I was looking at, or how did that work, I'll pull up the reference photo again and take a look at it more closely. Now I know at that point the main building is going to cut in front of that, so I don't need to do anything more there. Same right here, there's going to be a girder there, so it kind of is counterproductive to draw much more there. But I'm going to draw through a little bit just so I can get that good structure. You can see I fit that rock in there only because I drew the rocks and the shape of the rocks that are going to be concealed by the building. And that goes back to what I was saying a little bit earlier, where if you don't draw through or behind what is going to block, you will sometimes end up drawing poor structures. I don't need to worry anymore about that wall. I'll throw some texture on it, and then it will be the solid stone that is visible. Now I gotta think about, some of this stone is gonna get erased, so I'll throw some texture on it, but I'm not gonna feel sad if it gets erased. I don't want to put so much that I'm like erasing an hour's worth of work. Now, if you're watching this after the fact and you're wondering what I do every time that makes that noise, the filament is getting hung up and pulled too tight, so I'm just grabbing it and pulling it so it'll not jam up the feeder. I think my roommate turned the heater on again because it is freaking warm already. And it was not before he got home. Sorry about that. Alright, I gotta take 5. I'm gonna go turn that heater off. It's killing me. Alright, I'm back. Had to take a little bit of a break right there, get something to snack on, get something to drink. Quick look at how this is doing. Ooh, that retraction setting looks great. Yeah, that's good. And I hope that just stays that way. Alright. Now we haven't drawn much but rocks. But we're going to keep drawing more rocks. Now these rocks, I want them to be a little bit smaller. Kind of like what I got here. Because they are not the sub-basement. They are the main floor. So I kind of see them using smaller structural rock. Man, I cannot talk. I'm just going to shut up and draw. That is going to be a shutter, not an actual window. So there's the actual window edge. Yeah, for a second there I was thinking about like a decorative trim on this window. I'm not really a fan of that. I just heard that this artist is going to be doing a concert with Evanescence, and talked to my wife about it. She's like, I didn't even know Evanescence was still together. It's going to be an expensive concert. I tried to go see Lindsey Sterling, this artist, at probably one of the tiniest venues I've ever gone to a concert at. Average ticket prices are like $20 because it's a really garbage location venue, but it's cheap, so you can go see some really cool rock shows and stuff like that. So typical $20 ticket for this venue. When her show was there, it was just shy of $200. I was like, nope, I'm not paying that kind of cash for that venue. Standing room only. And it is just a big open room. But her ticket price was $200. No thanks. I don't make any money from these YouTube videos or Twitch channel, so I can't afford a $200 rock show. As much as I'd love to see this artist, cannot justify that. Wow, that was a little bit of a rough section of the wall. I just noticed I touch my face a lot when I'm doing this. I read a report on how many times a day people touch their face, and it is kind of scary. It's in the thousands. It's like 25,000 times a day. Now, as I'm going away here, I'm going to start trying to make these little blocks a little bit more skinny. Doing what's called forced perspective, because I know that these lines are converging as they get farther away towards that vanishing point. I know that things like windows get smaller, so they'll go from one side, they'll be one size, and as they go farther away, they kind of taper off. So you'll end up with this disparity in size. By making your lines closer together on one side, sorry, I'm trying to do this in front of my camera so you can see what I'm talking about. If you try to make them closer on one side of the image, it will force the idea that those lines are not necessarily closer together, but are moving away from you. There's a scientific term called the Fibonacci sequence. Is it Fibonacci? No, it's not the Fibonacci. It's the Doppler effect. You hear it with like cars that drive past you. It'll be that really high-pitched noise, and then it tapers off. You got to do the same thing with lines. So they'll be farther apart when they're close to you, and as they go farther away, they get smaller and smaller and smaller. And eventually they'll be so close together that you really can't even tell that they're that separate. And you should be seeing this pretty clear. I've got my arm in the way. But these lines going together are gonna tell the tale that this building is much, much longer than the actual line art will allow me to show you. So you can tell these blocks here are relatively close, and as they go farther away, they get smaller and smaller appearing. But your brain goes, oh, those aren't getting smaller. Those are just going farther away. And so I've just tricked you again. Same thing with these stones. As I go farther away, I will make them smaller. Not because they are actual smaller stones, but because, again, I'm trying to trick you. I'll also put less detail in them. I'm not going to put texture all the way out through this image, because in reality you wouldn't see it. Find somewhere around your house, or actually probably go outside your house and look at the house at the end of the street and try to pick out details of the stucco on the outside of it. You're not going to be able to. I'm looking outside and I can barely see the texture on the stucco on the house next to me. So the more you learn about things like this, the easier it is to trick the eye into getting the effect that you want. I'm starting to do bigger blocks just because I don't want to draw as many rocks. I can always come back and subdivide these blocks a little bit more. Especially if I keep them nice and abstract. Try to think of unique shapes. That's gonna be too big. I'm kind of falling into a pattern here, and I need to try to not do that. So I'm gonna come back over here and start dividing these rocks into smaller rocks. That's too straight of a line. It's too many rocks. It's bad when you get bored in your own drawing. Problem is, I'm afraid if I step away from the rocks to work on other things, I'm never going to come back to the rocks. I'll be like, ah, screw them. Whew. That's good enough. That'll do the trick. So I'm going to throw some texture in here. Now remember, I'm not going to do texture all the way down the building, because that would look weird. But these rocks that are closer definitely need to get some. I'm just kind of hitting them fast too. So this is where I used to hide my signature on my old art. I'd bury my initials somewhere in like the rock texture. I used to be so worried about people stealing my stuff. Although looking back on it now, it was not good. My art now is way better than it was, but I still have a long way to go still too. I think that's one of the things you'll learn as you kind of mature as an artist. You realize that you're never truly done learning. And sometimes you'll get better at one thing, and it'll cause you to get worse at something that you used to be good at because you've spent so long focusing and practicing. I used to draw people all the time, and now I have to practice at least once a week, and even then I'm not as good as I used to be. Not as quick, not as confident in my lines, because I do mostly this stuff now. You'll see I'm just kind of jumping around. It's because I'm trying to punch up spots that I feel like they're getting lost. Yeah, you want to constantly be looking around your image, otherwise you'll end up getting way focused on a single spot, and you'll spend, an hour working on nostril hairs, and then then your face will be all jacked or something because you've focused so much on the micro details. Like if I was zoomed in right now, so if I was way down here working on every individual pixel, I'd lose the entire structure of the house. I mean, I already know that these are barely going to be recognizable once I zoom this picture out, but like you're never going to see these pencil strokes or whatever digital strokes that I put on here. That's why you really got to punch those darks in there so that you have some definition and tone. But I'm not going to worry about getting super textured as I go even farther down here. I'm getting to the about where I'm going to stop worrying about the texture. punch those little pockets of dark up. But other than that, it's barely anything on these. Just doing little splatterings so it doesn't look like open canvas, because the complete absence of anything would definitely stand out as odd when I've got all this value and texture up in here. You get to think about what contrasts. So if I've got detail and all of a sudden there's no detail, that complete lack of detail is going to stand out as very unique or odd. So I don't need to worry about it that much. I'm just going to kind of go across all these things at once just to get something kind of splattered on there. And you'll notice I'm kind of sticking